Okay, so we're in business.
Yeah,
Good
we're
afternoon. And again, I'm still Henry Taylor, and it's my privilege today to be reading from my latest book, which LSU Press brought out last fall. It's entitled "This Tilted World is Where I Live: New and Selected Poems, 1962 to 2020." A span of time that, if I started acknowledging every indebtedness that I've incurred since then, we'd be here longer than the most energetic and persistent Oscar winner ever stood in that place. But I want to apologize for to and for anybody that I don't mention, but I do have some people I'd like to thank, beginning with my parents, in fact, who made a family in which poetry was always welcome. In my young adulthood, I incurred an obligation to Stephen Spender, who accepted for publication the poem that enables me to put that date, 1962, at the front end of that span of time. I was 19. I was a second-year student at the University of Virginia, and he came there for about a week or 10 days and did various writer-in-residence duties, including holding a series of half-hour conferences with individual student writers. I took him a handful of poems, and he liked one of them well enough to suggest to me that I might send it to Encounter, a magazine that he had helped to found and was still being the literary editor of. And he gave me a date after which I could be in touch with him, knowing that he would be back on duty at the magazine. So I sent him the poem then, and he did take it. It came out in October of 1962, a little bit after my 20th birthday. The other poets in that issue were John Berryman, Donald Hall, and Theodore Retke. So my baby career got underway there, and there really, for a little while, wasn't anywhere way but down from it. While I was at the University of Virginia, a professor named Fred Bornhauser launched me on the study of traditional form, rhyme and meter, and how it might help my work. I'm still exploring that, not exclusively. Shortly after my involvement with Fred, George Garrett came to the University of Virginia, and I think it's safe to say that he changed my life. The thing that he did that's immediately pertinent is that he helped me put together my first book, The Horse Show at Midnight, and he was instrumental in its having been accepted in the summer of 1965 by LSU Press. That was between my undergraduate period and my 1 year of graduate study at Hollins College, now Hollins University, where I worked closely with Louis Rubin and Richard Dillard and William J. Smith. We started out tweaking The Horse Show at Midnight, and then when it got put to bed, I started writing poems that ended up in my second full collection, An Afternoon of Pocket Billiards, which came out in 1975. It came out from the University of Utah because at that time, LSU was still holding a limit of 64 pages on a book of poems, and I was feeling like I needed more pages than that after having spent 10 years working on a second book. Utah did me proud, but they did let the book go out of print eventually, and when that happened, LSU picked it up. And in 1992, they put out in a single volume my first two books, The Horse Show at Midnight and An Afternoon of Pocket Billiards. I should say that my actual second book was a chapbook. It came out before Billiards did. It was called Breakings, and I've been grateful ever since to Glenna Lushai and her solo press for having made that happen. It had 7 of the poems that eventually ended up in An Afternoon of Pocket Billiards. So The Flying Change, which came out in '85, I think of as my fourth book, but I have every sympathy with people who think of it as my third. In either case, it had the outrageous good fortune to win the 1986 Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. There have been two more books since then, before this Tilted World, and I'll mention them as I come to them in the course of the reading. Excuse me. I want to thank a couple of more people. David Slavitt, for his untiring encouragement and deep friendship. Incidentally, he'll be reading in this series on November 2nd. R.H.W. Dillard, for a lifetime of friendship and support of my various works and plays. And Ted Kuzer and William Winthy, who also have been generously supportive of this book. I'll just read this little note of gratitude to people at the press. Only a very small number of relatives and friends have been with me longer than I have been with LSU Press. For more than 50 years, people there have been earning my deep gratitude and admiration. This time around, for sensitive care in the production of the book, I want to thank Kate Barton, Erica Bossier, Barbara Neely Bourgogne. She made this cover of the book, by the way. L.B. Kovac, James Long, Neil Novak, and James Wilson. To these, I want to add Sunny Rosen, with thanks for her wonderful work organizing this reading series. Now, finally, I want to thank my lovely wife, Mush, of whom I've had a new life. And I'll read the dedication to this book. For Mush. I love to watch you track your knowing hand among the skeins arranged in a yarn store, gauging the blend's effect, plucking a strand to try the feature you've been hunting for. I love how you speak to strangers on the phone, listening for the way to where they are, so you can make that space a safety zone from which no understanding seems too far. You praise the beauty of a checkout girl, while I stand wondering which way to look as the checker blushes and flicks back a curl. This miracle, however long it took to become you, is daily. You set your course by steadfast signals from the universe. And this new and selected business is a trying time in ways for any poet who's trying to gather up the poems that might be worth carrying forward and wondering exactly what the status is of those poems that one likes but has decided not to bring forward. There are 75 poems from previous books in this collection and 25 poems that have not previously been collected. The book is arranged in reverse chronological order. It opens with the 25 new poems and then goes directly into the selection from the most recent book before this one, and goes all the way to the end where you have a few poems from the Horse Show at Midnight. I'm going to read from the early poems to the later ones. So I'm going to read one that was in the Horse Show at Midnight. It's a poem. I call it a snapshot because it's a kind of poem that George Garrett called a snapshot. They're little anecdotes. They're almost like jokes, some of them, but you look at them and you say, well, they are also real poems. And when I saw what he was doing with those, it occurred to me that it would be fun to try them. And I've been doing it almost ever since, off and on. This is called Blackberries. On top of a ragged hill, on the farm next to my father's, an old man sat on his front porch and reigned over a dominion of thistles and briars. In his meadow, never mowed, blackberries grew wild, overran the field, smothered the grass, bound the cows and ate them alive. My sisters and I would steal under his fence, armed with pails, to pick as many berries as we could. We never got them all, hard as we tried. One afternoon, we stood in the briars, reaching for berries over our heads, each one hanging before us like a bunch of grapes. When down from the porch, the old man tumbled down the hill toward us, wild white hair in the wind, scattering all of his chickens as he ran. His tiny dog yapped at his heels. Go back where you belong right now. And he waved his arms. We turned and ran for the fence, clutching the pails in our arms, scattering berries behind us. We looked back once and saw him on the hill, shaking his fist in the wind and shouting, if you're too lazy to raise your own blackberries, by God, you shan't have mine. In a similar vein, but in the next book, this was in both Breakings and An Afternoon of Pocket Billiards, is called Writing Lesson. I learned two things from an early writing teacher. He held a nervous filly in one hand and gestured with the other, saying, listen, keep one leg on one side, the other leg on the other side, and your mind in the middle. He turned and mounted. She took 2 steps, then left the ground, I thought for good. But she came down hard, humped her back, swallowed her neck, and threw her rider as you'd throw a rock. He rose, brushed his pants and caught his breath and said, see, that's the way to do it. When you see they're gonna throw you, get off. I spent many years among horses, and in a poem somewhere, I think I have said that they taught me most of what I know now, and that's still true, I think. And this one is called Riding a One-Eyed Horse. One side of his world is always missing. You may give it a casual wave of the hand or rub it with your shoulder as you pass, but nothing on his blind side ever happens. Hundreds of trees slip past him into darkness, drifting into a hollow hemisphere whose sounds you will have to try to explain. Your legs will tell him not to be afraid if you learn never to lie. Do not forget to turn his head and let what comes come seen. He will jump the fences he has to if you swing toward them from the side that he can see and hold his good eye straight. The heavy dark will stay beside you always. Let him learn to lean against it. It will steady him and see you safely through diminished fields. And I think this may end up being the last of the horse poems I'll read. This is the title poem from The Flying Change. Flying change is a technical term for the change of lead that a horse can make while cantering or galloping. The leading foreleg, a horse canters like this, the one foot is ahead of the other in front and in the rear too, as it happens. And it's very easy. A horse is born knowing how to change that lead in midair, in mid-stride, without any effort, but it's harder when a rider is asking for it. The poem is in 2 parts, a prose paragraph, and then 3 stanzas. 1. The canter has 2 stride patterns, one on the right lead and one on the left, each a mirror image of the other. The leading foreleg is the last to touch the ground before the moment of suspension in the air. On cantered curves, the horse tends to lead with the inside leg. Turning at liberty, he can change leads without effort during the moment of suspension, but a rider's weight makes this more difficult. The aim of teaching a horse to move beneath you is to remind him how he moved when he was free. 2. A single leaf turns sideways in the wind in time to save a remnant of the day. I am lifted like a whip crack to the moves I studied on that barbered stretch of ground before I schooled myself to drift away from skills I still possess but must outlive. Sometimes when I cup water in my hands and watch it slip away and disappear, I see that age will make my hands a sieve. But for a moment, the shifting world suspends its flight and leans toward the sun once more, as if to interrupt its mindless plunge through works and days that will not come again. I hold myself immobile in bright air, sustained in time, astride the flying change. Now I'll go back to the snapshot mode for a moment. This is called Varieties of Religious Experience. The two snapshots in the flying change have ponderous titles that were taken from great writers. One is called Tradition and the Individual Talent, and I won't be reading that one, but it's there. And Varieties of Religious Experience. Thank you, William James. This old day worker, cleaning up the grounds of an abandoned church, getting ready to paint and put in glass, said somebody from away from here had bought it and was going to start using it again. Well, it had been a Methodist church. Were these Methodists? He believed it wasn't anybody like that. No, sir, he said. It is some of these holy sanctified goddamn people. After the flying change, the next book was had a somewhat edgy title. I wrote a poem about how you can make up a story and come to believe yourself that it's true and tell it to people so that they will too. So that the book is called Understanding Fiction, with a kind of nod to Cleanth Brooks and Robert Penn Warren. But the poem that I want to read from that selection is called After a Movie. I've been interested in movies off and on for many years. Once in a while, I write about them. And this poem came along because there was a film festival in Charlottesville, and George Garrett was putting together a kind of introductory pamphlet for it. And he called me up one afternoon and said, "You must have a poem about the movies around there someplace. Send it to me. I would like to use it in this little pamphlet." Well, I looked around and I didn't have a poem about the movies, but I decided to see if I could write one, and this is what came out. After a Movie. The last small credits fade as I'm sorry, I'll start over. The last small credits fade as house lights rise. Dazed in that radiant instant of transition, you dwindle through the lobby and out to curbside, pulling on a glove with the decisive competence of the scarred detective or his quarry. Scanning the rainlit street for taxicabs, you visualize without looking your image in the window of the jeweler's shop, where white hands hover above the string of luminous pearls on a faceless velvet bust. Someone across the street enters a bar, leaving behind a charged vacancy in which you cut to the dim booth inside, where you are seated, glancing at the door. You lift an eyebrow, recognizing the unnamed colleague who will conspire with you against whatever the volatile script provides. A cab pulls up. You stoop into the dark and settle toward a version of yourself. Your profile cruises past the city on a home drifting stream through whose surface sometimes you glimpse the life between the stream bed and the ripples, as when your gestures are your own again, your fingers lift a cup, beyond whose rim a room bursts into clarity and light falls on all things. The book after Understanding Fiction is called Crooked Run, and it is named for a little area, a stream, first of all, in western Loudoun County, Virginia, where I grew up. At various times in my life, I have lived along that little stream in perhaps 3 locations. My wife and I now live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and plan to live here as long as we can. But I grew up in Loudoun County, and the book Crooked Run takes its topics from episodes, recollections, observed scenes from the edge of that stream. It's a very geographically circumscribed collection in that way. This is called A Little Respect. This is a title that I was very happily given one afternoon by Marilyn Nelson. I showed Marilyn this poem, which did not at that time have a title yet. And she read through it and looked up and said, A Little Respect. And I thanked her very heartily, and that's the title. From the farm next door, long after midnight, there came one day last year the bray of a jackass, an unholy sound I had not heard for years. By now it is nearly as much a part of the air around me as the sound of my breathing. But that first note set me off, down the hill and across the meadow and up the road, then one farm north, where old Foster was still working when I was a boy. He assembled for haying a crew, young and old, black and white, in an era when some men might have sent separate and possibly equal water cans to the field. But Foster had one can, one dipper, with which each man took his turn, swirling the last swallow not taken into a jeweled arc as he passed the dipper on and let out a breath through his cooled throat like a velvet shout, and turned to work. Down toward the edge of the bottom, then back into the hill, 2/3 of the load on already, and the mules balked. It is a term rarely used in connection with horses, for instance, whose methods of subverting human wishes might be called stopping, quitting, refusing, or pulling back. They shift about under duress to avoid moving on. Mules balk. They put all 4 hoofs in touch with the force below the earth's surface and enter into a state of patient remoteness not unlike prayer or trance. Their apparent indifference to shouts, jerks, and blows can lead their oppressors to an unexamined belief that what they are doing is no more cruel than beating a rug. So with Foster and his men. As usual, they tired first, stepped back to take breath and wipe brow, and the air settled in nearly noon sunlight toward perfect stillness. The transparency dense enough to suspend a fleck of chaff, or the odd wisp of hay drooping weightlessly from the load like a fern in a glass paperweight. Decreasingly labored the sound of their breathing, and abrupt the halted buzz of a fly landing somewhere. On the offside, the slight creak of a strap under strain. A boy spoke. Just a kid, a ward of the county, sent out to this farm to be learning to work. Let me try, he said. And these grown men looked down on this half-grown black boy, then back at the team whose roots in the field were perceptibly deepening. What the hell, one of the men said, he can't do no worse than we done. So Foster stepped toward him, held out the lines. The boy took them, made them right in his hands, stood just to the near side of the rear of the team and spoke to the blindered heads. Come up there, Mr. Mule. First stillness, then a calm, slow lean into the collars, a hoof lifted and another, and they walked off up the windrow as if bound for their heart's desire. The boy glanced back as he walked with them and grinned. Call him mister. It helps sometime to talk to mules that way. Now I'm going to go into the section of new poems, and I'll read the title poem. The title of the book does not appear in the title of the poem, but it does appear in the poem. The poem is called Not Quite Lost in Space. The gravel drive surrounds me as I stare at the minuscule brightness of a grain of quartzite on a stucco pilaster bracing the coyote fence that ends our lane. It caught the sun and aimed it at my eye. How small a target can that slim ray find? I shift my head from left to right and see that maybe 1 square foot has been aligned with me for several seconds, and it's turning downward as the sun goes up. If I stood just here at this time for a year of mornings, would this convergence ever be renewed? Spheres crowd my mind, vast diagrams, slow change in annual cycles. I try to recall the little I've learned about Stonehenge, or when the moon shone down the upstairs hall. Now, as the seconds pass, the light goes out, but for a while these ill-formed thoughts revolve. I stand here coiled in orbits, head to foot, because this tilted world is where I live. This next one is the title poem of the section of new poems. It's called Yesterdays. It's a sestina in which the end words are the numbers 1 through 6, with sometimes using homophonic near equivalents. This isn't the first poem to have done that I'm aware of. James Merrill did this in a poem called Tomorrows, which is why this one is called Yesterdays. It's dedicated to J.L. McHenry, a former student of mine. I used to write parodies of my students' work at the end of a workshops semester. It's a tricky, I don't recommend that you try this in your own workshops. It takes a very carefully worked out relationship among the students and the teacher, and a sharp eye for what is going too far. But this started as a parody of J.L. McHenry, and after it was done, she said, "That sounds like a keeper to me." Yesterdays. Of all his whims, she said, I think of one least gratefully. He'd squint and hold up 2 fingers and wave them back and forth just 3 inches from my face. How many is it? 4? Are you seeing double? What's half of 5? I hope you held off drinking until 6. I hadn't had a drop to drink in 6 what? Months? Years? A unit of time is one vast era or 1 second. And if I've learned anything, it's that we needn't be too particular. What's a fiction writer for? Debating once, I said, it looks like 3, but on that hand, the difference between 3 and 5 is hard to spot, and being 6 as easy for you as being well. Before you take your hand away and claim you've won, consider what your tricks have brought us to. We toil in separate cells from 9 to 5 and get our desks cleared on the stroke of 5. The elevator drops us 23 stories, which is a lot more than the 2 sad stories we drag into this house at 6, each of us ready to tell the other one what our parents put us through when we were 4. How long, he asked with that shrink. Is it 4 years now he's taught you confrontation? 5? What difference does it make if I'm the one who gets it wrong? Would we add up to 3 if we departed from the bitter basics and counted the sane and nutty yous as 2? Put your hands down, I said. The left one too. The ultimatum you've been pining for will not arrive, though I'll be gone by 6 tomorrow. I'll set the alarm for 5. I'll throw my things in the backs of 2 or 3 friends' cars and split. I look out for number 1. A day or 2 ago, starting at 5, I scribbled out 4 drafts, discarded 3, then 6 or half a dozen, and kept this one. Here I am with mush again. We were in New Hope, Pennsylvania, I think. Bird call at evening. Wherever we are, we find our wonderlands. In one small town, as we held hands and strolled from dinner to our B&B, somewhere past roof and darkening tree, a bird call rose. Bo Peep, how sweet. I whistled back, and so we parleyed down the street. What bird is that, you asked, and I, what bird? That's just another 60-ish old guy. And this is called Art and Life. That pretty well covers it, doesn't it? In the Portland Museum of Art's snack bar one July morning, a young woman worked at the board that lists the specials of the day. From her little stepladder, she leaned in with various colored chalks, using both point and edge, adjusting with her fingers, experimenting with size and color, print and script, once or twice stepping down and back, then homing in on what was to be solved. The whole thing might have taken her 10 minutes. At last, she moved a little farther back to see how what she'd done had changed the room, while we, who had the good luck to be there at the beginning of her day, beheld the change she couldn't know that she had wrought merely by how her red hair caught the light. I'm going to end with I'm coming now to what Bill Matthews used to like to call the two-poem warning. I'm going to read two poems that haven't been published anywhere yet. Partly by demonstrating, I guess, that I'm still at it. A number of years ago, I read a wonderful book of text and photographs by a man named Thomas Hines about the area around where Faulkner lived and worked. It's called Faulkner's Yoknapatawpha. And it got me to thinking about how Faulkner worked out of the land around him, and also how he worked out of ancient texts. He knew his Greeks. The title of this poem is actually the first line. It's set off like a title, but it ends with a comma. Faulkner, looking up briefly from his desk, catches a glimpse of a single brick column with an iron Corinthian capital standing not within sight of where he is, but near enough to see when he drives by it. And he says to himself all over again that the mansion on whose porch the column stood has vanished into pasture land, that cows can scratch their butts on the base, that anything he turns up can be put into that house to do whatever good or bad it wants. What he sees next is a couple of men, Peloponnesians out of ancient times, walking below a hill backlit by sunset. Thinks of Agamemnon and Menelaus, how their father Atreus killed the sons of his brother Thyestes, served portions of them to him at a banquet, and thus launched generations of mortal vengeance. And there, from that chaotic pile of stone, he sees a broken column or a lintel standing against the sky like a stroke of ink. And one of those two fellows says to the other, "That's what there is of the old Atreus place. Hard to believe what all went on up there." And this last one is about a couple of old guys who act on what they seem to think is a good idea and find out that maybe, well, it wasn't all that good an idea after all. It's called Mall Sundial, and title will become clear to you, or the reason for it will become clear very soon in the poem, but it reminds me of one of my favorite sentences about poetry. It's the first sentence of an essay John Berryman wrote about Robert Lowell's Skunk Hour. It's in a wonderful book called The Contemporary Poet as Artist and Critic that came out. And Anthony Ostroff edited it. It came out about 1964 or 5, I think. And what happens in it is that a poem is presented, and then 3 poets you've heard of talk about it, write about it, and then the author of the poem responds. And that happens about 8 times in the course of the book. It's a terrific thing. Not without its moments of dullness, but it's a good book. Mall Sundial. Berryman said, "A title opaque and violent. Around a corner of your house toward the woodshed, I saw a splitting maul parked in the top of the block, the helve pointing about halfway up the northern sky. I told you that since both of us had decent watches, we could pull up a couple of chairs and a few beers and mark the ground at each hour to make a sundial. You gave me a curious look, trying to decide whether or not this was something you wanted to do, then said you'd go get the picnic chairs and a six-pack. I went into the little shop beside the woodshed and gathered a handful of screwdrivers and an awl to mark the spots where the shadow of the helve would be as we struck the coming hours. When you came back outside, we unfolded the chairs and cracked a couple of cans and sat. I asked you what roughly our latitude was. You said you weren't quite sure, maybe 36 or so. This was years before people had GPS units. I stood and looked closely at the helve, raised it a touch, and tapped the heel with a wedge to make it tight again. We drank 2 beers and let 27 minutes pass, and you got up and poked a screwdriver in the ground and pronounced it 4 p.m. For the following hour, or most of it, we asked each other questions about more than latitude, and you recalled reading somewhere a trigonometric formula for the gnomon that includes the tangent of the angle of Earth's tilt. So we looked out at the fading landscape for a while, talking of the astronomical distance between our little project and how it would be carried out if we had known enough about what we were doing. Amid these speculations, 5 o'clock came and went unmarked, and we wondered how long it was till sunset, then stood up and folded the chairs. You hooked your fingers into the plastic loops that still held the 2 last beers and started toward the house as I gathered the tools, pulled up the 1 screwdriver and put them all away. We parted, each to his own home and supper. Later, I lay in bed, the blank ceiling above me, snatching scraps of coherence from stray notions about the stars. Thank you very much for your attention and your hospitality.
Are you ready for some questions from the audience?
Why, sure.
All
I hope
right.
so.
Okay, wonderful. So our first question comes from Sandra. Sandra actually sent a couple of questions and they're all great, so I'm going to share them with you. Our first question from Sandra is kind of a dual question. You can answer one part or both. What aspect of the writing process gives you the most joy, and what phase do you find the most challenging or tiresome?
Well, I guess the most joyful part might be the first draft, where you're allowed to persuade yourself that what you're doing is terrific. Even though you're keeping some part of the mind focused on the grim fact that in fact it's not terrific and you're going to have to go back and do some stuff to it. I actually take a lot of pleasure in the revision process as well. The big jolt of having the whole thing turn up and be able to be caught, sort of, is a thrill. But there are lots of little ones too, and finding the right word that goes in there where the wrong word has been. I find very little of the process troublesome or painful. Once in a long while, if you're dealing with a deeply emotional subject that's hard to keep focused on or something like that and still express honestly, that can be tough to do, but getting it right is a lot more pleasant than getting it wrong. Of course, you get it wrong sometimes. Have to put it away.
Wonderful. This other question from Sandra is was that she'd like to hear more about how and why Santa Fe resonates as your new home, since it's quite distinct from the Virginia landscape.
Well, the Virginia landscape got left behind years ago. Mush and I moved to the Pacific Northwest in 2005, And we spent 10 years in Gig Harbor across the Narrows from Tacoma. And then we got interested in a tectonic entity off the coast of Northern California and all the way up into Canada. There's something out there called the Cascadian subduction. It's one of the places where the tectonic plates have come together. And for the last goodly number of years, they haven't moved. And those things are supposed to move a few millimeters or centimeters every year. And this thing has stayed stuck for long enough now for people to know that when it does break loose, as it must eventually do, well, it's going to be very, very unpleasant seismically there. This could happen anytime between last week and 200 years from now. And Mush and I talked about it and thought about how long we wanted to live where we would be getting up every morning saying, well, we're still dry and safe. And we had spent a lot of time in the wintertime. We used to go down to take our motorhome and go down to Arizona. And a couple or three times going back home, we would come through Santa Fe. And Santa Fe struck us as a place with a unique kind of spirit about it. Some of it's fraudulent. That has to be borne in mind. There's an awareness here that that history attracts folks to come and look around, tourists, and various things have been done to the architecture to help that along. So it's not always easy to see some of the things that lie beneath the surface here, as they do anywhere. But we love it here. I had a previous experience with desert living or near desert living. I spent 3 years in Salt Lake City early in my teaching career, and I liked it there. I liked the thin air. I liked the starkness, and I like those things here.
Thank you so much. We also have a lot of very positive comments, but I'm not going to just read them to you one by one. So I'll share those with you after the event. We do have another question from Larry. The question is, are you someone who writes on a schedule or when the inspiration occurs?
It depends on what I'm working on. I try to write regularly if I'm working on a piece of prose, which I do fairly often. I write critical essays about other writers fairly often, mostly for a magazine at Hollins University called the Hollins Critic. I've been writing for them for more than 50 years off and on. And in fact, I have a piece coming out in a few weeks, I guess, about the nonfiction writer, Lucy Sant. And so I work on that in a kind of scheduled way. I don't sit down with a kind of schedule to see if a poem happens. I've known people who did that. Bill Stafford used to do that. He would go to a place and generally around 4 o'clock in the morning, he would sit at a desk and wait for something to happen, and something almost always did for him. I have learned that trying to work that way makes a lot of things happen that shouldn't have. And so I do wait until I get the spur to start something that I feel like I can't leave alone. Once I start it, I tend to stick with it and try to work with it on a regular, hourly, usually late in the afternoon.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question is, I noticed that you include a lot of bits or fragments of memory in your poems. Can you talk about how you take parts of your own memory and turn them into work, and how exactly that process works for you, especially because memory can be such an ephemeral thing?
Well, I have an unusual memory. It's getting less sharp in certain ways. I'm 79 years old, and I don't know as many poems by heart as I used to. And I can also look off into space and have somebody's face cross my mind, and I know who that is, and I can't think of his or her name. It's somebody whose name I should know perfectly well, and it takes me sometimes several minutes or maybe even half a day to think of it. I think that's not too troublesome, because when I do think of it, I'm not completely puzzled about why. But anyway, I can remember things for years off and on. An episode will occur to me and I'll think about it and remember it and put it away again. And it could be years before it occurs to me that it's material for a poem. Something else has to converge with that memory. And some kind of energy, some kind of awareness that's an openness to experience that's not always there, I guess. Because I can remember things over and over and over again and take years before they get to be poems, and some of them never do. And I ought to say, just for confusion's sake, that Mall Sundial is pure fiction. Nothing like that ever happened. So you never know.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We have a question from David Slavitt. The question is asking your thoughts about the place of humor in poetry.
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear that.
David Slavitt is asking about your opinions on the place or the role of humor in your poetry, or in poetry in general.
Oh, well, thank you, David. You and I both think things can be funny in poems. I didn't really understand that as well as I came to until, as I said during the reading, I encountered George Garrett's little poems that he called snapshots. And I have had a lot of experiences that can be fitted into a little framework like that. The trick is that you have to make sure you're not just writing down a little prose anecdote. No matter how funny it is, if you're pretending it's a poem, then you have to stop pretending and actually make it a poem, with close attention to sound effects and the like. But I think the thing about humor in poetry is that people are usually so surprised to find it there. If you go to a poetry reading and somebody says something mildly humorous, everybody tends to laugh, mostly with relief that's because they're at this poetry reading. My advice to you about humorous moments in poetry is take those gags to a nightclub, and if they work there, keep them.
That's some great advice. Our next question is from Stephen. It's kind of a two-part question. Who are your favorite young poets, and is poetry on the decline in the U.S.?
Is poetry on the decline what?
In the United States.
Well, no, I don't think poetry is on the decline at all. I think poetry is increasingly rich and various. I used to teach a course called back in the 60s and 70s. I used to teach contemporary American poetry. At that time, that was thought of as poetry since World War II. I would have a hard time now teaching a class in poetry of the last 3 months. There's such a variety, and there's so much going on. I like the Dickman twins. I like Terrence Hayes. I guess Terrence Hayes is not a whole lot younger than I am, but he's a younger poet, I think. Younger. David Slavitt once published a book called 8 Longer Poems, and it's a book of normal size. And in the epigraph in the front of the book, he quotes somebody, I forget who it is, who says, "It is a peculiarity of our usage that a longer poem is shorter than a long poem. In the same way, that a younger poet is older than a young poet. I was a younger poet for a shameful number of years. I clearly no longer am, but I think Terrence Hayes is a younger poet, and I think he's a very good one. I like Tracy K. Smith. I think she's a fine poet. I don't keep up as well as I should, but I do. I don't review new poetry books anymore. I used to do that all the time, but I don't do that anymore. So those are a couple of poets whose work matters to me.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the answers. That is our last question. So I think we're ready to wrap up.
Well, I want to thank everybody for hanging in there and for those interesting questions, and you for managing this. Thanks a lot.